So if it works, if it don't work, it don't work. It don't bother me, man. But all right, the weather. Um, I'm gonna give you kind of an overview of the weather, like as I studied it and how I found it, and maybe if you want to do weather, this can help you. I've got over half my life involved in weather, meteorology. Where meteorology has led me today is actually we're getting into physics and we're getting into uh, maths, high maths, and then we're now getting almost into quantum mechanics, and it's unlocking the secrets of the universe, and it's one of the things that I wanted to look into, and it's maybe one of the things that you shouldn't look into. But uh, when I started, my interest was the fear of the weather, and I lived in an area called Tornado Alley, of course. My memory is the first weather was lightning through the windows and the fan and being left in my I was a kid in a little cradle. I was terrified of storms. So I dealt with terrible storms, and when I got older, we got our first computer. I think all tech entrepreneurs or people that are entrepreneurs or people that are in the computer tech industry has experienced that moment. And for me, it was meteorology. I played video games, but the meteorology was the first thing. 'Cause I was terrified. The tornadoes suck people up around here, like literally blow houses and buildings, concrete schools down with a slide, blow them away. And we have the worst tornadoes, some of the worst tornadoes here. We had the biggest tornado this year, two, almost 3 miles wide. So the tornado, if you know, we'll just keep it real simple. Two different things: high pressure, low pressure. Pretty simple, eh? A low pressure is where your air kind of sinks, and your high, well, excuse me, it could be a bit wrong where we're actually getting into this. Your low pressure, your air kind of sinks. Your high pressure, your air rises, but it also kind of it can block things. High pressure subdues storms. High pressure subdues things. It keeps a lid. Low pressure is when things sink and rise. Okay. And you have water. Water is made of what? Hydrogen and oxygen. And pretty much it has three phases: gas, liquid, solid. So you have it in ice form, 32 degrees Fahrenheit or 0 degrees Celsius. And you also have the Kelvin scale. In meteorology, without getting too far off, you can have a lot of different scales. But to keep it at the high and low pressure. In the northern hemisphere, it can be hard for dyslexic people or whatever, but your storm will start with three scales. There's actually four and a few more in there. I just gave you a brush. Storm scale, meso scale, synoptic scale, each of storms. So your local storm still deals with laws of thermodynamics. The cloud rises. It's less dense than surrounding air, and it will continue to rise unless inversion or whatever is present, and it reaches the top. You have different layers to your atmosphere. You have your troposphere. That's all I've ever focused on. That's your bottom 8 to 12 kilometers where your weather happens. And in there, you have different layers. And you have your mesosphere. And you have your exosphere. You have your thermosphere. Maybe not the order, but then you have two different layers inside of your thermosphere and your exosphere. Again, I'm having to learn about space weather right now. I've done a lot of work down here, and I'm learning about space weather, which it blocks out radio waves, and you do this thing with the atmosphere. Those who are radio operators, if you do any weather, severe weather forecasting, or the type of stuff that I do, you know about on radio, emergency management operations. Uh, they have a thing that they communicate with. I communicate instantly with law enforcement, department, emergency management, all that junk. You know, but it's hard to get. But what they do like is that atmosphere way up there. It can bounce off signal. And back to the low pressure and high pressure, you'll find all of that has to do with electronics. Magnetism is going to work your head. It might be a little heavy, but okay. Your small scale storm is generally driven by a large scale storm. You have what's called a synoptic scale event, where you'll find a large low pressure system. They come down in the northern hemisphere. We have this thing, they're westerlies. They come west and move to the east. If you're south of the equator, they move to the east, they go to the west. We operate with this thing called the Coriolis effect. 6 major jet streams, and the world orbits at an angle relative to the sun. It spins, and the spin angles is about 12,000 or 1,200 miles an hour, supposedly 1,200 some miles an hour spin. I'm trying to think of where to go. Okay, the 3 properties that make a storm. You need your lift, you need your moisture, you need your stability. I already discussed the moisture aspect of it. That could be your water, uppercase D. That is temperature dew point, and it's generally measured in your lowest 2 meters of the atmosphere. We have something like PBL, planetary layer, and there's a lot of research done today about tornado genesis, what makes the tornado. We get, okay, one bad thunderstorm. There's anywhere from 1,800 to 3,600 thunderstorms at any given minute. Thunderstorms is severe. It's severe criteria. Severe criterion pro National Weather Service offices, 58 mile an hour and or 3/4 inch hail. They've updated the mission is protecting the property and life of its constituents. So that's what it focuses on. And they do issue imports. They issue heat advisories, freezing fog advisories, anything to do with weather. See, we've branched now into government here in the United States. We have 2 different organizations. We have the SPC in Norman, Oklahoma, your tallies, your storm reports, and they also have some neat parameters. I'm going to leave those for you. If you dig in and you dig it, I'll leave those gems for you. And then the National Weather Service. Now, those are individual forecast offices. And I think there's over 100 of them across the United States. Here in Mississippi, we have National Weather Service, MEG, or KNQA, our satellite. We have a DSR 88D, it's a next band Doppler radar, and what it does is it scans clouds. It looks like a golf ball, and it just kind of scans the clouds, and that's in Memphis, Tennessee. And we have another one in KDAN, National Weather Service, JNS, Jackson, Mississippi. And they also have, I want to say it's in, I'm not going to get precise. We get real precise, but it's pretty much right down there. Jackson, Mississippi is where that, Brandon, Mississippi, I want to say precisely, is where that satellite is located. Scans, they have 128 nautical mile range, and they operate in degrees of what we call reflectivity. We can use base reflectivity, which is the typical product you're going to see on the TV is what most people identify 5 degrees. And there's all kinds of different degrees on here. You can go up if you're really scanning 1.5 degrees, 2.5, 3.5 degrees. What it does is it scans off the horizon. So, um, depending on your GIS system, if you have an integrated GIS system, you can actually measure the distance off of the ground where the beam is. And then, of course, you have this thing called cone of silence that is right over top of the beam, because the beam does not shoot straight up. The beam orientates. It scans, it moves up in elevation, it scans, and it moves up in elevation. And also there's other things. You have radial velocity based. Radial velocity is just kind of trip your mind there, but generally base velocity is velocity, which also meant 0.5, 1.5, 2.5, 3.5, respectively, depending on which user you're dealing with. You're dealing with the raw NIDS data. I think it's NIDS. It's been so long since I touched this stuff. And we actually can go to the quality of the data, whether we're dealing with 1,000-meter grid spacings or 250-meter grid spacings, and the difference is like night and day. And we can apply geometric smoothing to the data and make it look really pretty. And then back in the day, they changed from legacy to where I could custom my own. I'm not even going to go into that. It was almost like a trade secret at the time. So a lot of people don't know how to do that. And it's hard to increment those things where you actually can take a raw. I'm going to give you a little hint there where you can take a raw text on C and C sharp and get off into some real wicked stuff. I mean, I'm telling you, you can manually key it and then you can save it as another file and you can run it right through GIS, and then it goes through and it displays precisely on the data that comes hot off the server. And so you have two different aspects of it. You have your remote sensing and you have your observational. I mean, a lot of it's surface obs. They got these things in here. I think it's 16 or 32 different parameters. We call them METARs, METAR. And that's your pretty much what you get airplane trappers. If you look at for the aviation trappers, the airplane people look at that, and they look at that for their forecasts. And we look at mesoscale modeling or synoptic scale or any type of modeling, swarm modeling, excuse me. This stuff here is wicked. We got this stuff called no gaps. I got this AFWA MM5, which is classified as an Air Force model. I got the NW something. I got the RAP, the NAM nest, your typical NAM, your GFS, Global Forecast System, ECM, WF. That's your European. And there's a host of other ensemble models, spaghetti charts and all that pork and all that jive. I mean, it's great to look at if you really want to get hairy, but I have a few parameters I look at. I can keep them right here on my gloves, but I don't always tell people. It took me a long time to work on those. And if you look at some of the work I did on the tropical systems where we were integrating analyst data, we were running complete and total. We were working with WSV3. We had a connection to Comcast, and it was running because of the hurricane. We had the free high speed, and we got to deal with all different parameters in regards to analysis of the tropical cyclone. And we had the level 3, and then we had the analyst. And when it come through Cuba, we were able to run this GIS system. It didn't have some of the other features that I'm going to keep secret. God forbid I got into the industry, but we could drag down and see the mountains, and these mountains just ripped into the back of the system, which Uh, Irma would have been a much more deadly system, terrible system. It had Cuba, which is naturally there, and it's always going to be. That's why Florida is always really. You look at the trajectories of tropical cyclones there in the Atlantic Basin, particularly down there in the south, and then when they form, uh, they when they come up like that, and then Cuba hits them. There's some like Jamaica. There's a few real high peaks, and they cut right into a storm, and it's massive when you can look at your 2 kilometer resolution, when you can really dial down and you get your 15 minutes. Or I mean, some of the people probably in the military or higher up, they get the real deal alive. And when those clouds start cutting in, I mean, it can rip apart that that form, and it can drop several categories, 1 or 2 categories. I mean, it can damage the system. So you're looking at the system, the temperature, the health of the system in terms of millibars, the depth of low pressure, how low is the pressure. So, a system like we're doing today, slight risk, Oklahoma, uh, it was a bad November. We haven't had a terrible November. November is usually one of the leading months. Mississippi typically is the second month. Mississippi, November is the best. It was always my favorite because it's drier. I mean, it's right up on par with March or April, typically, but climatologically, those numbers are going down because they need the data. The reason November's so hot is you have a few opportunities where that low level moisture and heat, you can still get a good 60 degree, maybe 30-degree dew point, 80-degree day. I'm talking about lower. I'm talking about south I-20. But when you're up here, you're talking about in your mid 50s and 60s. So you have clear skies. That's one of the problems with the south, is that you're going to have residual moisture, too much moisture. The clouds are smothered. The storms are smothered in clouds, rain wrapped, HP dominant type systems. You're not really able to get the meat and the potatoes as you would out there in the Central Plains. But this is the time to get the Central Plains, as your dew point spreads, or your dew point's a lot lower. The spread. Let me define that as your difference. Okay, your dew point here is when your air reaches your saturation. Saturation is 50 degrees, 55 degrees. It has to get down there. And your spreads, you'd be okay, let's say it's at 70 degrees. And what you use to assess that is called a skew T log P diagram. And when I got into meteorology, as a kid, in like middle school, high school, and like when I actually started wanting to study it, when I took, when you're going to look at clouds, you're going to look at like, wow, that looks cool. But when you look at the business end, I never wanted to be a broadcast man. It was always operational. I want to be a WCM. What my life's goal was. And if you look at it from that angle, you can tell. And to see those parameters, the way they actually break and they butt out, we went, I started back to the Fujita scale. Now we use the EF, advanced Fujita scale, and they use with degrees of damage. We actually broken everything down into different things, high tension power lines to softwood, hardwood trees, trailers, modular buildings, high rise buildings, hotels, motels. We break it down, and they actually, speaking of breaking it down, they broke the actual speed of the tornado down, but it still doesn't satisfy some of the Doppler measurements, and there's a lot of mystery still with the power of the tornado, which is, I think, what captures most people, particularly here in North America, because I mean, many countries get tornadoes, but we actually lead the pack with the strongest tornadoes, and particularly here in Mississippi, which I was saying, the South gets. I don't. I think me and the people in the Central Plains are going to have a bit of a thing. You know, I like Norman, Oklahoma, OSU, Sooners, where I wanted to go to school, but then MSU, the Bulldogs. You know, we have a great meteorology program here, so it's kind of a North versus South thing. And you know, a lot of them. You watch that I-35 corridor when you get those storms cut there, and then in Kansas, that madness. You know, it'll make your head spin. But you start looking down here, we're right here at the Gulf of Mexico. You're looking at 1,500 feet above sea level. You're way up there, you know, and it's a different animal. Yeah, the shear may be a bit higher, but not necessarily, because we got the access to the moisture. I mean, you're looking at 200, 300 feet above sea level. You know, you're not even, I mean, you can't fly your drone 300 feet up in the air, and you're dealing with 40, 50 knot wind shear coming out feeding the beast. And, yeah, you're dealing with 170 knot jet dipping in, and it's just gonna, I mean, it's gonna flatten everything. And you deal with these long ones where pretty much you have the updraft on the ground. You're dealing with cyclic supercells. Some supercells, you have supercell and you have non-supercell. You have descending and you have non-descending. Pretty much, you'll see those a lot on the Front Range out there in Colorado, where we are, or where I'm from. They come from the bottom up. You see lightning like that. That's the wicked thing. It comes from the ground up. And a lot of times you'll see them out here, but it's rare, because what we deal with, we get a lot of multi-vortex, and we do get a lot of wedge activity is what we get. Is we get real killers because of the orientation to the axis of the low-level jet, your upper-level jet, particularly the Gulf of Mexico. These things are going to run. They run forever. They run forever. You know, when you're dealing with, you know, cyclic supercells, you have a RFD. Typical thunderstorm is going to have what? Front flank downdraft, or just a downdraft and an updraft. That's all that makes a thunderstorm cell. And you have they form out of three basic clouds: your stratus, your cumulus, and your cirrus. I mean, they're just three basic clouds, and then they break into suffixes. Those are your three general type of clouds. But your cumulus goes through several stages: your TCU, your tower and cumulus. And you see turkey towers, ACUS, that's alto cumulus castellanus. You may see some of these turret-shaped clouds that indicate instability aloft, and you look through certain vectors in the atmosphere on days if you really want to look at it. And I tell you what, there's always something to be seen on the dullest day. If you really love weather, there's always something to be seen. And to me, I married the weather when I was 16 at Union Station. It was something that I was dead serious about, and it's probably going to kill me too. But when you get that low function of that low level, the cloud, a thunderstorm cloud takes moisture and it grows, and it cannot grow. You have a lot of it all accounts at the bottom layer. You have what's called surface-based development. Everybody looks at your surface-based CAPE. You have CAPE, which is a function of your, I guess, DALR, your lapse rate. It's basically your temperature differential at the very root. It's LI is calculated lifted index. It's a function of the temperature differential between that cloud, that parcel of air, and the surrounding air. It has to be warmer and less dense in order to rise. It's in the laws of thermodynamics, which is serious in regard to engine building and power plants and things of that nature. It all functions down at the lower layers. You're going to see the clouds right there at the bottom is where it's difficult for thunderstorms to develop. They have things, two parameters, your LCL and your LFC. I'm not going to break those down. I'll leave those for you to look into, but they're very mission critical when you're dealing with a severe weather operation, you have to look into also your temperatures, because when you're looking at tornado genesis and how these things happen, I think what they're really breaking it down to is the ambient vertical wind shear, and in particular the hotographs, uh, LCLs, and the surface-based CAPE, uh, which is your instability at the surface level. It's like what makes the difference between a 5 mile wide mesocyclone that's churning at 400, 2, 3, maybe not that fast, 200 miles an hour. You can see this tornado warning and lightning and hail, but it never touches the ground. Hook echo, and the inflow jet, it just looks insane, but it never can grab the surface. So there's an angle of shear, and of course it has to be measured somehow. So we deal with hotographs. Hotographs are things that they send up something that's called a sounding, and they measure the wind. And what it also does, the photograph is focused exclusively on wind shear, and it's going to show you particular curves. And what we look at are curves, and a lot of times in meteorology is curves, and in science and statistics. I mean, the ramifications, until I started getting into professional science, which I'm not a professional, as you can't but tell. We're looking at some heavy stuff in here, electric engineering, to where we're dealing with calculus, the pi, and the rho, and the omicron, and the delta, zeta, and you got to know how to do it, and it looks like simple algebra. You got to cook the books, and to me, it's just a matter of cooking books. But you got to get skin in the game, because that's the one thing with meteorology that separated it from everything else. It was mat time. I've been in the gym. I do MMA. I did fucking jujitsu, and this is how you don't want to roll around, They might, but none of them like to roll around with a guy that don't bathe, and does dope all the time. But some of them really do, because I roll them up when I get in my zone, and they don't like that. But that's all I got. I spent 30 minutes with you. We'll see if this works. And, I want to try to inspire you for the sciences, and the weather. That was what I really wanted to do with my life. And if it inspires you, weather may not be your thing. It may be particle physics, or it might be building power plants, or growing, farming. I love farming and growing. We got vegetable garden. I read books for you in there. A lot of it roots on the same principles: the Newtonian physics, the Archimedes, physical science. So take a look at your science, physical science. And that's all the good I got for you today. Bye.